Hollywood has a graveyard. Not a literal one, but a long, quiet list of films that didn't just fail at the box office. They took entire studios down with them. Sci-fi is supposed to be the genre of infinite possibility. Spaceships, alien worlds, billion-dollar franchises. But for every Star Wars, there are a dozen movies that burned so bright and crashed so hard, they wiped out the companies that made them. Some of these studios spent years recovering. Others never did. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on 10 sci-fi films that didn't just bomb. They left financial craters so deep that the people behind them spent years trying to dig out. If you're new here, please hit that like and subscribe button for more videos like this. Let's get into it. Number 10. John Carter, 2012. By the time John Carter hit theaters in March 2012, Disney had already lost the war. They just didn't know it yet. The film had been in development hell for decades, passed between studios like a hot potato nobody wanted to hold too long. When Disney finally pulled the trigger, they handed first-time live-action director Andrew Stanton, fresh off WALL-E and Finding Nemo, an almost unlimited leash, and Stanton used every inch of it. Production costs spiraled past $250 million. With marketing, the total spend crept close to $350 million, making it one of the most expensive films ever produced at that point. And here's where the disaster really starts. The marketing was so confused, so vague, so utterly disconnected from what the movie actually was, that audiences across America had no idea what they were being sold. The trailers were forgettable. The title, stripped down from John Carter of Mars to just John Carter, communicated nothing. People genuinely didn't know if it was a Western, a war film, or a video game adaptation. The opening weekend brought in $30.2 million domestically. Against a film that needed roughly $600 million worldwide to break even, that number was catastrophic. Globally, it limped to $284 million, a figure that sounds decent until you realize the math simply doesn't work. Disney announced a write-down of approximately $200 million. It remains one of the single largest financial losses on a film in the studio's history. Heads rolled. Rich Ross, the chairman of Walt Disney Studios at the time, resigned just weeks after the film's release. The debacle didn't bankrupt Disney. They're Disney, they survive everything. But it fundamentally changed how the studio approached risky, original IP. The era of handing a single director an unlimited sandbox and walking away was over. What went wrong at its core? A combination of creative overreach, marketing incompetence, and a story that never translated its century-old source material into something modern audiences could connect with. John Carter predated Star Wars, Avatar, and dozens of other beloved sci-fi properties, many of which borrowed heavily from the same pulp adventure template Burroughs invented. And somehow, the film made him feel like a stranger. But if Disney's loss was painful, the next studio on this list didn't just lose money, they lost everything. Number 9. Titan AE, 2000. There was a moment in the late 1990s when every major studio wanted a piece of animation. Pixar was printing money, DreamWorks had Ants and the Prince of Egypt, and Fox Animation Studios, based in Phoenix, Arizona, was convinced they could run with the big dogs. Titan AE was supposed to be their big swing, an animated sci-fi epic, targeting older audiences with a bold visual style blending traditional and CGI animation. It had a rock soundtrack, a gritty post-apocalyptic premise, and the legendary Don Bluth behind the camera. On paper, it sounded genuinely exciting. The film's story centers on humanity fleeing Earth's destruction and searching for a massive spacecraft, the Titan, that could rebuild the human race. Dark, ambitious, and visually unlike anything Fox Animation had released before. The production cost between $75 and $90 million. For an animated film in 2000, that was enormous. It opened to $9.3 million in its first weekend. By the time it left theaters, Titan AE had grossed just $36 million worldwide. The studio had spent roughly twice that making the film. The math was brutal, and there was no way to spin it. Fox didn't wait long. Within weeks of the film's release, the decision came down. Fox Animation Studios was shutting its doors permanently. The Phoenix studio, home to hundreds of animators, artists, and crew members, was closed. Employees were let go en masse. Don Bluth's partnership with Fox was finished. It was swift, clinical, and devastating for everyone who had poured years into building that studio. Titan AE effectively ended Don Bluth's theatrical career. A man who had once been considered Disney's most dangerous rival responsible for The Secret of Nim, An American Tale, and The Land Before Time, walked away from the industry after this. The film has since found a cult following among people who watched it as kids, but that legacy arrived far too late to save the studio that made it. The cruel irony is that Titan AE isn't even a bad film. It's flawed, uneven in places, but genuinely ambitious. Fox Animation simply didn't survive long enough to learn from it. The next film on this list wasn't just a failure, it became a legal catastrophe. Number 8. Battlefield Earth, 2000. You'd struggle to find a film that crashed harder, faster, or more spectacularly than Battlefield Earth. Released in May 2000, it had everything working against it from the jump, except John Travolta, who was absolutely convinced it was going to be a masterpiece. Travolta had spent nearly a decade trying to get this movie made. It was based on the novel by L. Ron Hubbard, the founder of Scientology, and Travolta, a devoted member, saw the project as a personal mission. The result was a film so baffling, so poorly made, and so bizarrely shot, with nearly every scene filmed at a tilted Dutch angle for no apparent reason, that critics and audiences reacted with something approaching disbelief. Roger Ebert called it one of the worst films he had ever seen. It swept the Razzie Awards, winning 7, including Worst Picture, Worst Director, and Worst Actor. It lost in categories it wasn't even nominated for, because Razzie voters invented new ones just to describe how bad it was. Financially, the numbers were catastrophic. The film grossed $30 million against a claimed budget of $73 million. But the budget itself became a legal issue. Investors who had backed the film through Franchise Pictures later sued, alleging the company had inflated the budget figures, essentially claiming the movie cost far more to make than it actually did, in order to manipulate financials. The lawsuit went to court, and a jury found in the investors' favor. Franchise Pictures was ordered to pay $121 million in damages. The company never recovered. Franchise Pictures essentially collapsed in the legal aftermath, its reputation destroyed and its finances in ruins. Travolta's goodwill in Hollywood, rebuilt after Pulp Fiction, took a hit from which it arguably never fully recovered. The film was meant to launch a franchise. Yes, they were planning sequels, and instead became a punchline that persists to this day. What makes Battlefield Earth uniquely fascinating as a disaster is that it wasn't a victim of bad luck or poor timing. It was the product of unchecked vanity, weak creative oversight, and a studio that made critical financial decisions it couldn't survive. What came next wasn't much better. In fact, it may have been even more preventable. Number 7. Stealth, 2005. Stealth is a movie that Columbia Pictures genuinely believed was going to launch a franchise. The studio had invested $135 million into a high-octane military sci-fi action film about a rogue AI fighter jet that goes off script and starts making its own combat decisions. Starring Josh Lucas, Jessica Biel, and Jamie Foxx, it had the budget of a blockbuster, the marketing push of a tentpole release, and absolutely nothing that audiences actually wanted. It opened to $13 million in its first weekend, a number that would have been disappointing for a $40 million film, let alone a $135 million one. By the end of its theatrical run, Stealth had collected a humiliating $32 million worldwide. The studio had spent over $100 million just on production and marketing, and walked away with roughly a quarter of that. Sony Columbia absorbed somewhere in the range of $130 million in losses. Quietly, without ceremony, all franchise plans were scrapped. There were no sequels, no spin-offs, no video games, no extended universe. The film vanished from public conversation almost immediately, which, given how much money was spent on it, is remarkable. What makes Stealth particularly painful as a case study is how confident the people making it seemed to be. Director Rob Cohen, riding a wave of goodwill from The Fast and the Furious, 2001, was trusted with an enormous canvas. But there's a fundamental problem at the heart of the script. The rogue AI at the center of the story is actually more interesting and more sympathetic than the human characters, and not in a way the film seems to have intended. Audiences felt nothing for the people they were supposed to root for. Stealth became an internal reference point at Sony for years, a cautionary tale about greenlighting concept-first, character-never blockbusters. Rob Cohen's career never returned to the heights it had reached before. Jamie Foxx, who had just won an Oscar for Ray the same year, looked visibly embarrassed in interviews about the film. The loss wasn't just financial. It eroded creative confidence at Columbia in a way that took years to rebuild. And the next film? It had been sitting on a shelf for 2 years before it was released, and that should have told everyone exactly what was coming. Number 6. The Adventures of Pluto Nash, 2002. When a studio finishes a film and then doesn't release it for 2 years, that's not a scheduling decision. That's a warning signal. The Adventures of Pluto Nash was completed in 2000. Warner Brothers looked at the finished product and quietly put it in a drawer. 2 years later, in August 2002, they finally released it. In August, traditionally one of the weaker months for prestige releases, and the results were exactly as ugly as everyone inside the studio feared. The film, a sci-fi comedy set on the moon in 2087, starring Eddie Murphy as a nightclub owner caught up in a mob conflict, cost $100 million to produce. It grossed $7.1 million worldwide. That is not a mistake. $7.1 million on a $100 million budget. The return rate was so low, so staggering, that it immediately entered conversations about the worst financial disasters in Hollywood history, and it held that position for years. Warner Brothers took a loss of approximately $96 million. That's a film studio writing off nearly $100 million on a single Eddie Murphy vehicle that nobody wanted to see, that the studio itself clearly didn't believe in, and that somehow still got a wide theatrical release rather than being quietly buried. Murphy's career, which had already been showing signs of strain after a run of middling comedies, took a significant blow. Pluto Nash arrived the same year as I Spy, another flop, and together they marked the beginning of a prolonged rough patch for one of the biggest stars of the 1980s. It took years and a return to Beverly Hills Cop territory before audiences fully forgave him. Warner Brothers internally tightened its approval process for high-concept comedies following the disaster. The lesson, that star power alone cannot carry a film with no script, no vision, and no audience, seems obvious in retrospect. At the time, though, nobody inside that studio was willing to say it out loud until after $100 million had already walked out the door. The next company on this list didn't just lose one film, they lost a string of them, and each new disaster brought them closer to total collapse. Number 5. Lifeforce, 1985, and Masters of the Universe, 1987. Canon Films in the 1980s was operating like a studio with something to prove, and no one telling it to stop. Run by Israeli cousins Menachem Golan and Yoram Globus, Canon was a high-volume, low-oversight machine that greenlit films on ambition alone, often pre-selling international distribution rights to fund productions before a single frame was shot. It worked, until it absolutely didn't. Lifeforce arrived in 1985 with director Tobe Hooper fresh off Poltergeist and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. The film, a bold, bizarre sci-fi horror about space vampires draining the life force from London, had a $25 million budget, extraordinary for Canon at the time. The premise was genuinely strange and audacious, but audiences in 1985 had no idea what to make of it, and it grossed just $11.6 million domestically. It wasn't a catastrophic bomb on its own, but it was a significant warning. 2 years later came Masters of the Universe, the live-action He-Man adaptation, budgeted at $22 million, that managed to gross $17.3 million worldwide. Another loss. Canon kept going, kept spending, kept pre-selling rights they didn't have, and acquiring licenses they couldn't afford. The house of cards was getting taller. By the late 1980s, Canon was hemorrhaging money. The combination of sci-fi misfires, action film overreach, and a business model built on pre-sales that couldn't cover production costs had caught up with them. Pathé Communications acquired a majority stake in 1989. By 1993, what remained of Canon Films filed for bankruptcy. The empire Golan and Globus had spent 2 decades building was gone. The sci-fi failures weren't the only cause, but they were the bleeding wounds that couldn't be stitched. Canon had bet big on being a legitimate player in tentpole genre filmmaking, and the films simply weren't good enough to back that bet. What happened next is a story about one man's obsession turning into a $180 million problem. Number 4. Valerian and the City of a Thousand Planets, 2017. Luc Besson had been trying to make Valerian and the City of a Thousand Planets for most of his adult life. The French graphic novel series had been his childhood obsession, and after The Fifth Element proved he could build a visually spectacular sci-fi universe, Besson was convinced he was the only person who could bring Valerian's world to screen. In 2017, he finally did, at a cost that nearly destroyed his studio. Valerian became the most expensive French film ever produced, with a budget of approximately $180 million. EuropaCorp, Besson's production company, had put a staggering amount of its own capital into the film, supplemented by foreign pre-sales and co-production deals. The marketing budget pushed the total commitment even higher. The film needed to perform like a genuine global blockbuster to justify its existence. It didn't. Valerian grossed approximately $225 million worldwide, a number that sounds positive until you understand the economics of how studios actually profit. After theater cuts, marketing expenses, and distribution costs, EuropaCorp was looking at a loss somewhere north of $80 million. The film underperformed catastrophically in North America, where it earned just $41 million domestic. The financial fallout was severe. EuropaCorp entered a period of deep financial distress and eventually sought protection under French commercial restructuring law, the equivalent of bankruptcy reorganization. The company sold a significant equity stake to a Chinese investment group to stabilize itself. Besson's personal reputation also took hits during this period, compounded by separate personal controversies that dominated French media coverage. EuropaCorp survived, technically, but it emerged a fundamentally different and far weaker company. The Valerian sequel that Besson had envisioned was never mentioned again. The studio that had produced Leon the Professional, Taken, and Lucy was hollowed out by one film's overreach. The next film on this list had one of the most prestigious names in Hollywood attached to it, and it still couldn't escape disaster. Number 3. Mortal Engines, 2018. The weight of expectation on Mortal Engines was immense, and that weight crushed it completely. Peter Jackson's name was attached as producer, the man who had transformed The Lord of the Rings into one of the most beloved and profitable franchises in cinematic history. Universal was backing it. The source material, Philip Reeves' acclaimed young adult novel series, had a passionate fan base. The concept, enormous mobile cities consuming smaller ones in a post-apocalyptic world, was visually audacious and genuinely original. And yet, almost nothing worked. Director Christian Rivers, a visual effects veteran making his feature debut, delivered a film that looked extraordinary but felt emotionally hollow. The characters failed to connect. The story, despite its incredible premise, felt curiously flat. And the marketing, much like John Carter before it, never successfully communicated why audiences should care. The film had a reported production budget of approximately $100 million, with marketing pushing the total investment significantly higher. Its worldwide gross was $83 million. Not enough to cover even the production costs alone, let alone marketing and distribution. Universal's losses were estimated at over $100 million. Wingnut Films, Peter Jackson's New Zealand production company, went effectively dormant following the film's release. There were no announcements about future projects. No follow-ups to the Mortal Engines series were developed. The infrastructure Jackson had built, the same infrastructure that had produced King Kong and the Hobbit trilogy, went quiet in a way that felt permanent. The film's failure is particularly painful because the premise genuinely deserved better. The world of Mortal Engines is rich, detailed, and imaginative enough to support multiple films. It simply arrived without the soul required to make audiences invest in it. One studio, though, managed to make the same catastrophic mistake, not once, but twice. And the second time was arguably worse. Number 2. Supernova. Supernova is one of Hollywood's most chaotic production disasters. A film so troubled that it went through multiple directors, multiple rewrites, and multiple identities before finally limping into theaters with absolutely no one willing to fully claim it. The original director, Walter Hill, removed his name from the film and took the pseudonym Thomas Lee in the credits. A drastic move that signals just how badly things had gone. Francis Ford Coppola, one of the greatest directors in history, was brought in for reshoots. That still didn't fix it. The film, a sci-fi thriller set aboard a deep space medical rescue vessel, had the bones of a decent premise and a cast that included James Spader, Angela Bassett, and Robert Forster. But the production was plagued by creative disagreements, studio interference, and a script that went through so many hands that nobody was sure what story they were trying to tell anymore. MGM eventually took over full creative control and re-edited the film themselves. The result was a critically savaged, commercially ignored mess that grossed $14.8 million against a budget that had grown well past its original estimates due to reshoots and production chaos. MGM and United Artists absorbed significant losses on a film that had never functioned as a coherent creative project. the broader context matters here. MGM was already financially fragile at the turn of the millennium. A debt-laden balance sheet and a string of underperformers had weakened the studio's foundation. Supernova wasn't the killing blow on its own, but it was representative of a studio making expensive, creatively incoherent decisions it couldn't afford. Within just a few years, MGM was sold to a consortium of investors in a bankruptcy-adjacent deal, its library auctioned off and its future uncertain. Supernova is the kind of film that appears on worst of lists, not because it's entertainingly bad, but because it's depressingly inert, a monument to institutional failure. The final film on our list came from a duo that had once reshaped Hollywood itself and couldn't recreate that magic, no matter how much money was thrown at them. Number 1. Jupiter Ascending, 2015. After The Matrix, the Wachowskis were given something very few filmmakers ever receive: a blank check and unlimited trust. They had earned it. The Matrix was a cultural earthquake that changed action filmmaking, visual effects, and science fiction storytelling in one film. Studios believed, understandably, that whatever the Wachowskis touched next would carry some of that same electricity. It didn't. Speed Racer in 2008 was the first stumble. Beautiful, ambitious, and ignored by audiences. Then came Cloud Atlas in 2012. Critically divisive, commercially disappointing. By the time Warner Brothers greenlit Jupiter Ascending with a $176 million budget, the pattern should have been obvious. But studio faith is a slow thing to erode, and the Wachowskis' names still carried enormous weight. Jupiter Ascending, a sci-fi opera about a cleaning woman who discovers she's the reincarnation of a space queen, was delayed from its original summer 2014 release date and pushed to February 2015. That move tells you everything. February is where studios release films they've given up on. It's the cinematic equivalent of a quiet resignation. The film grossed approximately $184 million worldwide, on a production and marketing budget that likely exceeded $250 million total. The losses at Warner Brothers were estimated at over $100 million. The studio, which had already absorbed significant losses from other tentpoles, became visibly cautious about investing in original sci-fi IP at the blockbuster level. For the Wachowskis, Jupiter Ascending was effectively the end of their Hollywood blockbuster era. No major studio has handed either of them a film with that scale of budget since. The story of their career arc, from the groundbreaking originality of The Matrix to the boardroom silence that followed Jupiter Ascending, is one of the most dramatic falls from grace in modern Hollywood. The pattern across every film on this list is impossible to ignore. 10 films, 10 financial catastrophes. And if you look closely at every single one of them, the same story keeps repeating. Too much money, not enough oversight, and a fundamental disconnect between what the people making these films wanted to create and what audiences actually wanted to watch. Sci-fi is the most expensive genre to get wrong. The sets, the effects, the world building, none of it comes cheap. And when the story at the center isn't working, no amount of spectacle can save it. Studios have lost hundreds of millions of dollars learning that lesson, and some of them didn't survive the education. The next time a massive sci-fi film gets announced with a ballooning budget and a director with total creative control, remember this list. Because history in Hollywood doesn't just repeat, it reruns on an endless loop. And nobody ever seems to change the channel. If you made it this far, drop a comment telling us which of these you actually sat through. And if you haven't already, like this video and subscribe. There's a lot more where this came from, and you don't want to miss what's coming next.